So now I'm going to share my screen and we will begin. One moment, I opened the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Your computer?
Okay, I'm gonna mute some people first. There we go. Okay. So welcome to Israel's Most Daring Operations #2. For those who perhaps don't know who I am, my name is Netta Asner-Minster and I'm the Shlicha at B'nai Israel Congregation. This is the second session. If you weren't in the first one, it's totally fine. I'll just say technical stuff for the beginning. Please make sure you're muted. If you have any questions, feel free to use the chat. And I hope that the chat is enabled. It doesn't look like it is because I teach kids. No, maybe it is. One moment. Here, I think it's the only host. So everyone publicly, wonderful. So now you can chat everyone publicly and privately. I just changed it. I just teach Hebrew school kids, third graders, and they shouldn't be chatting everyone publicly and privately. So we finished with that. And also this is being recorded. So if you don't want to have your video shown, I'm just letting that known in advance. And one thing before I wanted to share before I actually begin is that I'm also part of a project called Life Online, which some of you, that's how you got here. So Life Online is a community I've created with other shlichim, people like me in various places, and together we create content together. So you can also be exposed to things like this and variety of other content. And I put it now in the chat, also our Facebook group and the link to sign up for the email, which I am in charge of. So I promise you it is really not spam. Okay. So I will also just say that I will be sending an email tomorrow with all of the materials I am using today. So, because I am going to be talking with my opinion a little bit put into it, and I would really like if anybody's interested to look into materials that I am looking into as well. But it's just quite a lot to explain here. So I will just promise you that whoever registered and I have their email, they will receive an email from me tomorrow with all the relevant information. Okay. So before I actually begin, I want to start with this quote, which is "Hamitziut ola al kol dimyon," which means reality is better than anything that you can make up. And I really think that that is the quote to remember throughout this series, that this is reality, these operations. And, you know, despite the fact that I am bringing cinema portrayals in these series too, and how it's different or adapted and etc., the reality is sometimes crazier than we think. So I always like to start with that. So what will we be actually doing today? So first of all, I will be talking about what actually happened in the Eichmann operation, going into details about what was the story behind it, technically, historically. As you can see, there are also two pictures of films. I'll also be talking about the cinema portrayal following the operation of Eichmann and the operation capturing. So I am focusing on the capture and not on the trial and what happened afterwards, which also is a unique, fascinating thing as in of itself, but I'm focusing more on the capturing and the operational side of it. So this takes us basically from 1957 to 2018, more or less, when this movie came out, and I'm sure many people here have seen it. So we're going to begin straight into our story, which takes us back to 1957. And I just want to remind you that at this time, 1957, Israel is 9 years old, and they haven't really accomplished something super major, but Israel's become known as having great intelligence. The Mossad, if anybody saw the first session, the fact that they found a certain speech made it so that they were more known, but really they haven't done anything huge operation-wise. And they're very much a beginning agency at the time. So 1957, this scene takes place. I apologize if this is from a movie and not the real people. Unfortunately, I couldn't find real pictures of these people here, but it still demonstrates what I want to say. So this person on the right over here, his name is Luther Hermann. He went through the Holocaust. He got blind during hard labor in Dachau. He lost both of his parents. He was a half Jew in German, but he lost both of his parents to the Holocaust. And he married a German and moved to Argentina following the Holocaust. There he had his daughter, Sylvia, who's over here. And Sylvia started dating this boy named Nick. And Nick would start to brag about how his father was an SS officer and they should have, killed all the Jews, not knowing that Sylvia was Jewish because Luther Hermann was a very Aryan name. And he assumed that he was a very known Aryan family in Germany and did not know that Sylvia was Jewish. Sylvia thought it was odd that she was never invited to his home and had suspicions about who her father actually could be. And her and her father decided to do a surprise visit to his house in a place called Olivos, a random town in Buenos Aires. And they go to the house and there is this man. Now, sorry, I did mention, but it's important to emphasize that Luther Hermann is blind. He was blinded by the hard labor in Dachau, and he is blind. So they go to this house and they just hear and speak to him. And Luther Hermann is positive by hearing him that this is Eichmann, this man. So what they do is they report their findings to this man over here on the left named Fritz Bauer, who was a known Nazi hunter. And and with that information, he went to the Mossad, to Israel, and gave the information that there is that this blind man, Luther Hermann, is suspecting to have found Eichmann. So what Israel does, the head of the Mossad at the time, he sends agents to Argentina, to Buenos Aires, to this man, Luther Hermann, and they say, okay, what you need to do is find this and this information, let us know, and we'll look into it. So following the operation, people say it was very unprofessional to make a blind man look for additional information, but that's what happened. And what Luther Hermann found was that the house in Olivos, whatever, I'm sorry if I'm saying it incorrectly and somebody here knows how to say it better than me, but this house was bought and under the name of three people, Schmidt, Clement, and Daguto. And Hermann claimed was that Schmidt was Eichmann. And these two other people were just individuals who were fake, and they were just put into the a contract of the house, basically. And with that information, the Mossad agents looked for this Schmidt person and found out that there was no absolute way that this could be Eichmann. And they let it go. This picture on the right is Eichmann's sons. They're younger. Nick is obviously older if he's dating somebody, but I just wanted to show a real picture of the boys. Basically what happened is that they dropped the case in 1958, and only a year and a half later was the case revisited once again. Bauer was so mad at Israel and the function of the Mossad that he went above Israel straight to the Attorney General and said what it says on the screen, that Eichmann is not Schmidt, it's Ricardo Clement, meaning that Luther Hermann was correct, saying that it was one of those three people who were involved in the house and were in the contract, but it wasn't Schmidt, it was Clement, who he thought was a fake person. And at this point, they started to act immediately. And what happened was that Israel sent this man, this is an older picture of him, he looked much younger at the time, we'll see a younger picture soon. This man's name is Tzvi Aharoni. He is German, he Hebrewized his name. His original name is Hermann Arendt, and he was sent to do groundwork in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, to really confirm that Ricardo Clement is actually Eichmann. So what happened was that he had a unique idea with which he would send a messenger, Argentinian messenger boy, to give a present to Nick Eichmann from his supposed lover, lover in quotations. So what they did, what happened was that he went to this Olivus house. At this point, it was deserted. It was not in a good location. They really didn't believe that Eichmann lived there. But through the messenger boy, they found out that basically they lived on Garibaldi Street in a place called San Fernando. And what happened was, so then Tzvi Aharoni went there to this different location on Garibaldi Street, and found out that at the end of March 1960 was the 25th anniversary of Eichmann and his wife, Vera. And lo and behold, he took a picture of Eichmann, and it was officially confirmed and sent to David Ben-Gurion that he was found. And David Ben-Gurion's response was, "Bring him to me alive or dead, better alive to educate the youth." And with that, the operation was a go. And this picture is from actually after the operation itself, but I brought it before just so we can see the people who were involved in the operation. I'm pointing out a few names as well that are important to remember for later on in the session. Again, I don't have complete confirmation that these are the actual people, but I assume according to the pictures of later on. Before I point out these people, I just want to mention that all these people who went on the operation were considered to be volunteers. And I want to specify why I'm saying volunteers. Israel is 12 years old at the time. They are a brand new country, and they're going into a different sovereignty. They're going into Argentinian territory without the knowledge of the Argentinian government, and going to capture someone and supposedly bring him back to Israel or do something with him. If the government initiated such an operation, it's extremely problematic. So the fact that they were volunteers and it wasn't a government operation kind of changed the terminology and assisted the Israeli government for this operation to actually happen. So if you pay attention to accounts, they're always considered volunteers, even though they are in fact Mossad agents, and this is clearly approved of and encouraged by David Ben-Gurion, who was the prime minister. David Ben-Gurion is right over here. We can identify him with the hair. Tzvi Aharoni is right behind him. We have Isser Harel over here, the head of the Mossad. And another person, just remember the name, it'll be relevant later on, Peter Tzvika Malkin. If you've seen any of the movies, maybe that name rings a bell. So Peter Malkin. So those are the four people: David Ben-Gurion, Tzvi Aharoni, Isser Harel, and Peter Malkin. Okay, so they were ready to go for the operation, and they did some groundwork in advance. So first of all, they found a villa. They sent 4 people basically in April 1960. Let me make sure that I'm actually, yes. In April 1960, they sent 4 people to find a villa in which they would bring Eichmann to once he was captured. So this is not the actual villa, but it was nice enough and just to portray that it was a villa. And they found the house, they prepared it. And in addition, they found out that on the 20th of May, an Israeli delegation was being sent to Argentina in honor of 150 years of Argentina. So it just so happened that there was an Israel delegation, there was a plane going to Argentina at the time from Israel. It was planned to be on 11th of May. That was a date they had arranged for it in advance. But they knew already prior to the operation itself, that they would only have a plane on the 20th or 21st. basically after that delegation arrived to Argentina. So the question was, what were they going to do? Were they going to delay the operation when they already had people on ground preparing, whatever they needed to prepare? Or were they going to keep Eichmann in captivity for 9 days? They chose the latter, which has a lot of implications and complications because they can get caught. And again, taking consideration there are Israeli officials on Argentina sovereignty capturing an individual who is Argentinian. It's problematic for many international relations reasons, especially for a young country. So they were definitely nervous about doing that, but they decided upon that instead due to the preparations they already done towards the operation. In addition, while they also first arrived and were doing the groundwork and finding the villa, they went to Garibaldi Street, or Garibaldi Street, sorry, I'm saying it incorrectly. They went to the road that he lives on, and by chance saw that at 7:40 p.m., Eichmann walked out of his house walked from the bus stop at the end of the day of the work to his house. And they basically they want a ching in their brain, and they realize how they're going to capture Eichmann, basically. So now I got my hands on the wonderful plans of the actual capture, and I'll explain what they actually did. This is Garibaldi Street, okay? This is the Clement Eichmann house. This is the bus stop. And it basically had 2 cars. Car number 1 had 4 people who would be at the hood, basically looking as if they were fixing the car. There was something wrong with the car. They were helping each other to fix the car. Car number 2, which we see here, over here, that was supposed to blind Eichmann. So basically, Eichmann gets off this bus stop, walks towards Garibaldi Street, then turns right. Okay, so he's walking up. The minute he's about to turn, he's blinded by car number 2, and then before he even gets to his house, car number 1 will grab him inside the car. That was the plan. And again, they expected it was 7:40 p.m. And we have even here, there's some pictures over here of the house and of the bus station as well. So this is the actual plan that you can see it's in Hebrew with the specifics about how they caught him. So they expected him at 7:40, and the original agreement was that if he doesn't come by 8, they're going to leave. Israel was there at the time of the capture. 8 o'clock had come around, and he had not arrived. Because he was the head of the Mossad, he could also call those shots on the moment and say, okay, we're waiting longer. And that's what he did. And exactly at 8:05, that's when Eichmann got off the bus. And within 30 seconds, he was in the car. And so 8:05, 8:10, they were on their way. He managed to yell once, but that was it. He was gagged and tied, did not say a word until he was brought to the villa. Over our fake villa over here, and 8:55. And basically, according to the Mossad book that I read, that gives the accounts of the operation, the minute that someone spoke to him in German, he responded that he was Adolf Eichmann, and his SS number as well. And in addition, because he was also scared, that's according to the book, he claimed that he also knows Hebrew verses. He was starting to quote from the Bible, and he learned it from a rabbi in Warsaw. So it was important for him to claim that. That's the story of the capture itself. And the beginning part of him admitting and confessing that he is in fact Adolf Eichmann is what's agreed upon. But then this is where it gets complicated. What happened during the 9 days of captivity? There are various accounts and opinions as to what exactly happened during these 9 days that Adolf Eichmann was in captivity. And they're about two different things. I purposely put pictures here of Eichmann so during his captivity so you could see the body language, his face. Think about for a few moments what he was thinking about, what is going through him at this time. He doesn't know how long he's going to be there. He doesn't know what's going to be done to him. It was important for me to bring these photos that I found that were actually from real time, especially given the second part of this session. So the opinions about the days of captivity divide into two. So one is Eichmann's behavior during captivity, and did he talk to anyone? So according to the Mossad book that I have, it basically claims that the people who were there were people who volunteered. They did in fact volunteer. They had someone to do with the Holocaust. It was difficult for them to be serving him head to toe. Eichmann, nothing particularly dramatic happened. He was very agreeable. He was scared. He wanted to please his captors because again, he didn't know what was going to happen. And what happened was that the Israel gave the Israelis who were there time off because they were so agitated and nervous that they had to serve Eichmann completely and while he was left alone in this room. And the only person who spoke to him was Tzvi Aharoni, the only person who spoke German. And what he did get from him was about how he actually got to Argentina following the Holocaust. And the other thing that is known is part of part two is that he signed a document towards the end of his captivity. He's basically claiming that he is aware of his crimes and he wants to be tried in Israel. So there's a question of this document that he signed, that we know that he signed. Did he just sign it? And more importantly, who was there when he did it? Again, according to the book I read in advance, it was Tzvi Aharoni, but there'll be different interpretations of that later on. So these are the two important points to be aware of regarding these 9 days. And what I'm going to do from this point is finish the operation story up until briefly before actually getting into the specifics on the different opinions regarding these two issues. But again, during the 9 days of captivity, we have Eichmann's behavior during the captivity, and did he talk to anyone? How talkative was he? And also regarding the document he signed in the end, saying he would be tried in Israel. Who was there when he signed it, and did he just sign it? Okay. So now we get to the actual final operation of bringing him to Israel itself, because he had to be brought on a plane. So again, he was 9 days of captivity. On the 21st of May, 1960, he was put on a plane back to Israel. Now, over here, this is Eichmann. And if you, now I'm going closer up, this is his double that they found, and Mossad agent who's supposed to be his double. And as you can see, both passports have the same autograph, Ze'ev Zichroni. So what the plan was that Eichmann's double was supposed to be a flight attendant. Eichmann would pretend, or the story that they gave Eichmann was that he was a flight attendant who was sick. He was going to be drugged. This is the syringe they used to drug him, and this is the doctor who actually drugged him on the way to Israel. He was put on the plane, drugged, pretended to be sick according to the flight crew, and that's how he was brought to Israel. I'll just note that the day he was brought to Israel, Fritz Bauer, that Nazi hunter who, basically started this whole thing and enabled the process to actually begin, was informed that Eichmann was in Israeli captivity, and he burst into tears. So that was but the fact that he was brought to Israel was a circle full closed. But then, so this is 1960. It took about a whole year later that we get to the trial, which I'm only going to speak about very briefly. We can do a whole session just about the trial itself. The trials took place between April to December of 1961. And what's unique and important to notice is that the trials, as Ben-Gurion said in his quote beforehand, the purpose of the trial was to be educational to the youth and to future generations. So this is not a courthouse. It's the Jerusalem Convention Center, where you usually have events, you usually have plays, and you can tell that this is a stage over here. You have an audience also. Not saying that it wasn't real judges, there were real testimonies, people fainted. They brought real people to tell their story, but it was extremely televised. It was really in a format of showing what the Eichmann trial was. Eichmann, of course, was the only person in Israel to be given a death sentence, and on the December 15, 1961, he was hung. I'm going to stop here for a moment and look at all your faces again. I'll put a spotlight on myself, though, one moment, to just tell two stories briefly regarding the end of Eichmann's life, and that will end part one of the operation part. So two policemen were given the responsibility or opportunity, however you call it, to be the ones to basically hang Eichmann. Why were there two people? They each had a different button. That one was really hanging Eichmann and the other was fake. So in that case, the two people do not know which actually hung Eichmann. So I thought that was an interesting tidbit about that. And the other thing is that it took an additional year, June 1962, until his ashes were actually gotten rid of. Basically, on June 1962, a plane was flown beyond Israel's territorial waters, and the ashes were poured into the ocean. So that concludes the story of Eichmann and the operation side of it, with briefly understanding also how it continued. If there are any questions about the operational side, please feel free to write in the chat. I'm not gonna take questions right now, but either write them down or please write them in the chat, and I'll refer to them at the end. Now, we'll go to the second part, which is the cinema portrayal, now that we actually have the operational story and also have those questions in our minds that are important to be aware of. And the cinema portrayal basically starts from the moment Eichmann was captured. There was a lot of interest around this story, and understandably so. He's become the example of the Nazi who was found and hunted and brought. He was the person who thought of the final solution, and here he was the only person in Israel to receive a death sentence. So the interest in his story was there from the beginning. Okay. So again, it started as I mentioned, started in 1960. So pay attention that I said that the trial was 1961, and his ashes were only gotten rid of in 1962. So the story wasn't completely complete until 1962. So in 1960, the minute he was brought to Israel, this man named Leon Uris, who wrote a known book called The Exodus, which was very popular and was a very popular movie as well, even as a book and as a movie too. So he actually reached out to Ben-Gurion. He reached out to Israel as well and said, I want the information. I want to get exclusive footage and details. I already have a deal with Columbia Pictures, and I want to do a movie. So of course, at this point, the trial hasn't happened yet. There's a lot of classified information. So they kind of let it die. And it did not happen in the end, although, there was an opportunity for a real huge motion picture the minute it happened. But because of the whole hype and interest, the Israeli government, on their own initiative, created this book called The Capture of Adolf Eichmann, which you see in the bottom left, by Moshe Perlman. So again, there's still classified information. It's only partially the story of the operation of what I said as well. Because at the time, 1961, the story wasn't complete yet. He was only hung in December of 1961. So there was information brought out pretty immediately, but again, not fully. It took about a decade before the first book was really written about the operation itself. So this is Israel, if you recognize the photos from before, former head of the Mossad at this point. 1975, he wrote this book called The House on Garibaldi Street. And he, as it says, the first full account of the capture of Adolf Eichmann, told by the former head of Israel's Secret Service of the Mossad. This was the first book that actually told about the story. And in 1979, there was a movie that came out. And as you can see, Topol, who is known from Fiddler on the Roof, Chaim Topol, Fiddler on the Roof, Salah Shabati, he played in it. It was a TV movie, but it fell flat. And the reasoning that they gave was that it didn't work well or didn't succeed was because it was boring. Eichmann's character was not interesting. It wasn't dramatic enough. There wasn't that spice or something that, would attract more or be more spicy, I guess. So with that kind of Israel's side of the story kind of was put aside and not brought in, to the fame of the Eichmann story that we know today. That changed about a few years later. In 1986, Peter Malkin, this is him, all of a sudden appeared and spoke up. And he basically had a 1.5-page article in the New York Times, which we see over here, in which, for the first time ever, he shares his heart-to-heart talks that he had with Eichmann. And these heart-to-heart talks really expressed Eichmann as somebody who has humor. He is witty and charming, and he really received this personality update from Isser's movie and also account previously that you had just about 10 years before, more or less. And these heart-to-heart talks really become extremely popular. Maybe some of you even know him, his name, or read the book. And he actually came out with a book in 1990 called Eichmann in My Hands, based on these heart-to-heart talks he had with Eichmann. And from this point, he was basically received, especially in the US, as the Eichmann expert. Whenever there was a talk about it, whenever there was a discussion about him, his personality, anything about the operation specifics, he was the person who, the go-to person. Now, I'll also mention, this is important to say, that Peter Malkin claims not only that he spoke to him and had these heart-to-heart and found this new personality of Eichmann through the exchange with him, but he also claims that Eichmann signed the document in which he agreed to go to Israel when he was in the room. Now, why did this also only come out 25 years after Eichmann is captured, or after the Eichmann story? Because technically they weren't supposed to be talking to Eichmann. That's what Peter Malkin would claim. And to expose himself like that at that point would be dangerous. By this point, he was retired, so he could also expose this experience he had with the heart-to-heart talks with Eichmann. So that was the reasoning for not exposing this beforehand and only exposing it 25 years afterwards. However, in 1992, this person over here, Tzvi Aharoni, who I've mentioned already a couple of times, who did the groundwork, who spoke, in the original account that I said, he spoke to Eichmann, he was the German speaker. He came out and said, I don't know what Peter Malkin's talking about, but he had no common language with Eichmann. At best, he knew Yiddish. He didn't know German. Tzvi Aharoni was the Mossad agent who knew German, and therefore he was the one communicating with him. So he said, I don't know what conversations he had. Maybe he did have conversations and was able to communicate, but he might not have understood Eichmann well because he didn't know German. So Tzvi Aharoni came out with this book, Operation Eichmann, Pursuit and Capture. As you can see, his name is below. 1992. By this point, Peter Malkin had become pretty known because of the New York Times article, because of his book, and Tzvi Aharoni's account was kind of pushed aside, and Peter Malkin's account brought up. The only thing that was done with Tzvi Aharoni's account, I'm just putting that as a asterisk side note, is what you see over here on the bottom right. It's a short cartoon, 15-minute video called The Driver is Red that was done in 2017. I'll just note that Tzvi Aharoni passed away in 2012 and Malkin passed away in 2005. So unfortunately, they're not here today to share their accounts, respond to me or what I'm saying. But this was the situation at the time in the early 90s. And I'll also say that when Tzvi Aharoni retired, he moved back to Germany with his family, and he actually returned to his original name, Hermann. So he became pretty private following his retirement, whereas Peter Malkin took the opportunity to become very known. And in 1996, another major motion picture was done about Eichmann, but this time according to Malkin's account, the man who captured Eichmann. And for now, I'm actually going to share the trailer because I have the trailer. And I just want you to keep in back of the mind my account and what I said and the two questions too. And also Eichmann's personality. So let me just open it 1 second, and it's probably good. 1 moment. And clearly now it's not loading. Oh, here we go. 1 moment, here we go. Now we'll share it. Okay.
The most notorious war criminal has been in hiding for 25 years.
This is my father, Ricardo Clement.
I'm afraid we must be leaving. We're already late for an appointment. Sind Sie Deutsch? Nein.
I will never forget the voice.
Now, an elite team out to avenge the death of millions
Who tipped us?
A blind man.
It's a dangerous game.
is about to uncover the secret of a seemingly ordinary man.
The only way to know for certain is to lift him and question him.
You risk a whole operation based on a guess.
I take the man. This is on your head. Shall we?
What is your name?
Ich bin Adolf Eichmann. You find it difficult to even look upon me.
My sister's boy was about your son's age, and you killed him.
But he was Jewish, wasn't he? It was the law.
What would stop me from choking him to death?
How sure you are, how certain of your morality.
We need to get him out!
They can't legally take him out of this country without his consent.
Okay, so Eichmann got a little bit of a character update. He's responding. But I already mentioned before what Peter Malkin said about Eichmann, the humorous, witty, charming type person. I forgot to mention that also Peter Malkin had an additional thing, was that his sister's family died in the Holocaust. So that also gave him that additional victim side that added to the story, basically. Now, I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint presentation 1 moment. There we go. So that is 1996. The motion picture came out and was successful. Then we reached 2018, just 2 years ago, when Operation Finale, which is actually the name of the real operation that happened in Israel. That's what the movie is called as well, with Ben Kingsley playing Eichmann. Really, major motion picture film. They took the Eichmann up a notch, and I will just even show the trailer so you can compare quickly between the two, and even also to the account that I was sharing beforehand as well. And then I will share my conclusions. 1 moment. So as you can see, Eichmann is way more talkative there than also in the previous version and in the original. He really received an updated character here as well. And from an article I read, I'll just read the quote. He is cunning but not raging. He's cynical and not ideological. He's fragile and non-threatening. He's a mastermind. He's an evil genius. He's manipulative. It makes you sympathize with Eichmann. And I will just say that the trailer was shown in Israel, but the film was never shown. You have people who still remember and were alive for the Eichmann trial, remember how Eichmann was portrayed. And the fact that the movie portrays him as this evil genius, mastermind, cunning person who is manipulative, who you relate with, who you also find fragile and non-threatening, that was something that Israelis could not contain, and the movie was not shown in Israel, this operation finale. Now when I conclude, I'm going to leave two questions, and I will answer them. But I do want to leave, all this information up to you, which is why tomorrow I'm going to send all the materials that I used and read as well. There are two questions when we conclude, and now we've seen also the operation material and also the cinematic portrayal and the development of it from, Israel, or the book that the Israeli government came out with, up until, Ben Kingsley being hypnotically superb, as it says in this slide. We have two questions that are important to answer. One, where is the truth? Is it with the movie? Is it Peter Malkin? Is it Israel? Is it Zvi Aharoni? If you ask me, I believe that the truth lies with Zvi Aharoni. Again, I wasn't there. I don't know. Peter Malkin could have had these meaningful conversations that were just developed and fabricated slightly, but he did have those conversations. I do believe Zvi Aharoni, just because according to the current facts, he is the one who spoke German. He is the one who was there doing the groundwork in advance and was actually told to speak to Eichmann because he was the one who spoke German. Therefore, I would believe more his account rather than other people's. And that's one question to answer that you might think differently than me, and I totally okay. That's to the point that I showed all the different opinions, and also while sending the materials tomorrow. On the other hand, there's another question that we need to answer. Is there an additional benefit to the fact that this movie came out in 2018? True or not true, it was widely seen by especially people in the US and worldwide because it was such a huge movie. And I brought a quote or a piece of information here purposely. And I think this was from, I apologize, I don't know the year, I think it was 2019. 66% of Gen Z, which are people who were born from the 90s up until the mid-2010s, which means I'm included in that, do not know Jews died in the Holocaust. Considering that these people might have seen the movie, and this allowed them to know about Eichmann's character, that he killed Jews, and even if he was they changed his character a little bit to make him more manipulative, to make him more relatable, and they put Ben Kingsley in this position. Perhaps that the benefit, what you're gaining from it, that additional knowledge of the Holocaust, is worth it. And when I asked myself that, I do think it's worth it. I think that, at the end of the day, there are sometimes costs the cinema have to do in order to make a film worth coming to and to attract the audience. And I think that we can make a difference between an Israeli audience to an international audience. That Israeli audience or Jewish audience, I guess, should know about Eichmann's character, the truth behind it, and have that account Zvi Aharoni. But also at the same time, if a Hollywood film can allow more people to be aware of the Holocaust, then I'm okay with that. But again, this is my personal opinion. I see that my husband is making faces, so he disagrees with me, which is totally fine. This is the point of having discussion, to make those questions and disagree with one another. And with that, I thank you for listening. I know this is a very emotional turmoil, a lot of different opinions here. And I think that people have opinions because it's the most known. I'll be taking questions now, but I just want to say beforehand that the next one is on November 11th and about Eli Kohen. And I know a bunch of people already told me, what about Entebbe? And don't worry, we're gonna get to that. That's number 4. So you get to look forward to that in December. And with now, I see there are already a couple questions. So I will now take questions, and I'm looking at it now. Okay. So the first question that I have here, what was the purpose of Eichmann's double? It was, Eichmann was not coming with flight attendant clothes. So he was meeting somebody who would have clothes of a flight attendant, and they switch clothes basically. So that's why he had to have a double originally in order to just switch positions as the flight attendant from the plane that was already coming in. So that's the reason for that. The second question that I have here is, did Eichmann actually become a citizen of Argentina? He did. The trailer we just heard said there are Nazis crawling here, and it's true. A lot of South American countries hid Nazis. They changed their names, they changed their identities. They had families come afterwards or beforehand. That's why his name was Ricardo Clement. He didn't have an Argentinian passport saying that he was Eichmann. It said that he was Ricardo Clement. So he had a complete identity change in order to actually be in Argentina. Thank you for that question. The next question I have is from Alan, and is, do we know what the people Eichmann lived with were told where he was for those 9 days? Alan, do you mean his family, or what are you referring to? You can unmute yourself if you hear me right now.
Well, where he was living all these years, what were they told? What did they know about after his capture? If he's in the country for 9 days, they must have worried where he was. Did they reach out to where he worked? Did they do any kind of, information with the police? Do we know any of that?
So according to the book I read and the account of Eichmann, his family looked for him, and they thought they looked at the hospitals, they looked at morgues. Eichmann was always scared that he was going to be caught. Any former Nazi who ran to South America knew that there were Nazi hunters who were looking for them. And that always was a concern when they moved to whatever country they moved to. So his sons looked for him in those places, like I said, and they reached the conclusion that he was taken by the Israelis. They knew that. They didn't know what they were going to do with him, and they couldn't find that, and they didn't notify police or detectives or whatever from the account, but also take into account that 9 days later already, he was brought to Israel, and it was public that he was there. So once he was brought in Israel, they knew where he was, that he was actually in Israeli hands, he was in jail, and he was going to be put on trial there. But they did look for him in hospitals and morgues. That was his family. Thank you for your question about that. And I see now there's Larry and Robin. Are you familiar with the Israel Story podcast? There were at least 2 episodes related to Eichmann. One about the anesthesiologist, how do you say that? And anesthesiologist who sedated Eichmann so that he could be flown to Israel, and one about the men who were responsible for guarding Eichmann while he was held in Israel. I have not heard about this, but I would really appreciate it if you send it to my email, or I'll reach out to you. I'm sure someone has your email, and then I'll reach out or I'll look for it. So it's Israel Story. So I'm writing that down now. Okay. Wonderful. So thank you for sharing that. And also anyone here, if you are interested, there's the Israel Story podcast that talks about those 2 people. And then you can go, again, more into detail than I went. I just had, a little bit under an hour in order to tell this story. I wanted to also go into cinematic portrayals. So thank you for sharing that. The next question is from Dave, and it's, what do you think of the veracity of Israel's book? Does it differ from Aharoni's? I need explanation of what veracity means. What is veracity? Truth. Okay, thank you. This is why you have an American husband. So I do believe in the truth of Israel's book. That's important to say as well. I will say that I have not read fully their books. I just read, quotes from their books, so I have to admit that. And I read a lot of articles following interpretation of the different books and the cinematic portrayals, etc. It's important to be aware this was the first book coming out, and so he wanted to be as truthful, and also perhaps things were still classified. I think the fact is that both his and Aharoni's account were just shoved aside. They weren't, put on the spotlight, or they weren't, super, looked into, because Peter Malkin's was more interesting, had more, meat to it. So I would put them like pretty similar, but Aharoni just actually spoke to Eichmann himself. So you can actually talk about the conversations he had, what he heard regarding how he got from the Holocaust to Argentina, which he did have those conversations. In a recent exhibition, there was a note that he actually wrote, a report that he was sending to the Mossad about the fact that Eichmann wrote the letter and didn't sign the letter, that he wrote it completely by himself. So Tzvi Aharoni had more details because he really was a little bit hands-on with Eichmann that Israel didn't have. And Israel also had a larger perspective of the operation compared to Tzvi Aharoni, who was specifically, doing groundwork and really involved. I think the best recommendation is just to read both books, and then you will have a better idea. But you're correct that it's worth noticing Israel's book as well. The next question is from Taibo, or just the note. One of the ways Nazis got to South America was called the rat line. Do you want to mention something about that, or you can go to the next question?
Well, for people who are interested, because Vatican and other archives are now opening up, it was always known that there was Roman Catholic collaboration in getting those Nazis out, and there are just more things being published about the rat lines, though I think the term was coined decades ago, maybe in the 50s, but there's just more and more out there about the rat lines.
Thank you. So that's important. It's another thing you can look into as well, ratline and israelstory.org. Thank you for that. The next question is from John. What might have happened if Eichmann didn't sign a document agreeing to be tried? How much of that was coercion? Do you want to comment on that, John, yourself, or your opinion?
No, I'm asking you.
Oh, you're asking me. Okay, fine. So the document, although it said in the trailer that you need to sign the document for him to actually be tried in Israel, it really had not much legal basis. It was a little bit coerced. According to the book, and I didn't get into the specifics because there's a lot of details, according to the book that I read, he first of all asked if he could be, he said, I'm okay with being tried, but I wanted to do it in Germany or Austria. And Tzvi Aharoni answered, that's not going to happen. It's going to be Israel. And then the following day, he agreed that it would be Israel. Again, this person is in captivity with Israelis. He doesn't know what they're going to do if he says no. And again, according to the accounts, he wasn't that dramatic person who was manipulative. He was pretty much, doing what his captors told him to do. So the letter, despite the fact that it was a big deal that he signed the letter and he will be tried in Israel, it really was a little bit more coercion, and it really didn't have any legal basis in the end. He was just brought to Israel, and at that point, once he was on Israeli territory, he could be put on the trial as well. Thank you, John. Okay, next question is from Charlene. Did his family know his past? His family did know about his past. Vera, his wife, and his kids knew who he was. They were very much Nazis themselves and believed, as I'm saying, the original story that the blind man even knew that Eichmann could be his father, because Nick was saying, my father was a great SS officer, they should have just killed off all the Jews. He was using this language. So his family definitely knew about his past and definitely were supportive of his views as well against the Jews. So thank you for that question, and that I could elaborate on that. Ted Fredman says that it's a story about Rafi Eitan. Ted, do you want to share that with us?
Sure. In 2008, we were in Israel on a program, and we had a speaker, a guy named Rafi Eitan. He was the Israeli spy master who commanded the team that captured Eichmann. And Rafi Eitan was at the head of the pensioners party, which got, they can't see it. Oh, but this is the camera here. No, this is the camera.
Yes, now we can see, yeah, now we see it better.
Rafi Eitan, when he died he was written up in the New York Times.
Mm-hmm.
But he told us a story that when they first captured Eichmann, he reached his hand into his pants.
No, his shirt.
In his shirt. And what did he say?
Well, they knew that Eichmann had surgery and he had a scar.
Mm-hmm.
And they knew that if they had the guy with the scar, so Rafi said he's the one who put his hand up the shirt, and he said once he felt the scar, they knew they had the right man.
That's our story.
Yeah.
So that's correct. That's correct, but they still wanted the confession from him that he was in fact Adolf Eichmann. So that whole scene in the beginning did happen, but you're correct that there is the scar. I didn't go into specific details, but thank you for adding that. I really appreciate it. It really adds to the story for sure. Where am I? Here we go. Looks like there's a few more questions. Thank you, Ted. Carol says, do you know anything about his kids? Other than, I did see an article that one of his kids were found in Britain. I didn't look into specifics about their opinions today. It's worth looking into. Again, the son who is involved in this story, his name is Nick Eichmann. But I don't know anything more if they're involved in neo-Nazis, if they just, kind of laid low and were quiet. I'm sure they remain pretty private for the rest of some of them are still alive. And I saw our British article, when I was looking for pictures of the Eichmann boys, I found an article that they were spotted recently, but I didn't look more into it. So I apologize, I don't have any more information about that, but there is more information out there of articles and stuff. So Lewis says, according to the movie, there was a strong Nazi presence that was searching for him during the 9 days. You're adding that. Lewis, do you want to add upon that? Perhaps, if you're still here.
I'm here. I don't remember anything about the movie.
Okay.
Lynn is the one that said that.
It might have been part fictionalized, but according to the movie, there was a very strong neo-Nazi or Nazi presence, and he was obviously very involved in that. And they searched high and low for him because they suspected that the Israelis had him.
But that was in the movie. That might have been just for dramatic purposes. Who knows?
My point of saying like the 2018 movies, a lot of things were fabricated basically in that movie or for that movie. Even they admit it. The Ben Kingsley and the director would say as well that they based it on Peter Malkin's words, but they fabricated it even more. So according to the book I read, it's only his sons who looked for him in hospitals and morgues. In the 9 days, it wasn't like fellow Nazis. Maybe they had fellow Nazis who assisted the people who they knew, but it was really more low key. And once they suspected that the Israelis had him, they knew, they had nothing that they were going to do. They weren't going to go against them themselves, from what I read. But it could have been dramatized. Thank you for adding that, though. I appreciate the additional.
Can I say something? Can I add something?
Yes.
I remember like yesterday the trial. I was very young at the time, unmarried, and I watched it every single night. What surprised me was that the survivors in Israel did not tell their kids what they suffered and what went on in Germany and in Austria. And so the young people were totally shocked when they saw Eichmann and the things he did.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for adding that, because that is a very important point, that when Holocaust survivors came to Israel, especially the new generation, they were supposed to be the Sabras. They were supposed to be this new pioneer Israel. And in a sense, they hid their Holocaust stories. So the Eichmann trial not only made Eichmann an international known story and the crimes he did, but it really was to educate the youth and to bring the story in Israeli Holocaust memory to light. And Rita, thank you for adding that. That's very important. The trial was a really important moment that young people in Israel were not aware of the horrors, and it kind of brought a change in Israel memory of the Holocaust into, rather than pushing it aside and saying we need to build this new Jew, and focus on things like the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, or things that that they weren't just brought to the gas chambers and murdered, but only the things that they actually fought, that their stories were put on the spotlight, and even the one, and all, no matter what they were important. And it's really incredible and important to mention as well. Thank you. So there's two more notes that I have here, and then we will conclude. So Sarah says, for all Nazis, not all Nazis hid their identities afterwards. I saw Dr. Zuroff speak about his time as a Nazi hunter, and it was crazy to think these individuals didn't want or felt they didn't need to as well. So thank you for adding that. That's important to be aware that some people did not feel they need to hide their identity as Nazis following the Holocaust, that they were very ideological in that case. So Larry just added that it's episode 46. So that information is in the chat, and I will send it as well in the email tomorrow. That concludes, in that case, all the questions and comments and remarks, and I really appreciate it. It means that all the questions means that you were engaged and interested, and that makes me very happy. I really thank you for staying the whole time and joining. I'll send an email tomorrow. And the next Israel's Most Daring Operations will be about Eli Kohen, the Israeli spy in Syria, who has an incredible story. And also there's other cinematic or TV shows that come out recently about that. So we will be talking about that on November 11th. Same time, 7:30. The program guide might say a different time for whatever reason or other places, but it's 7:30 p.m. and the rest of them will be 7:30 as well. Thank you so much, and Laila Tov.